The town of Blackwood had always been a quiet place, the kind where nothing ever seemed to happen. Nestled deep in a forest, its residents lived in modest homes, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches intertwined like gnarled fingers. People often whispered that the woods held secrets, but most dismissed it as folklore meant to keep children from wandering too far. It was late autumn when strange things began to occur. The first to go missing was Daniel Harper, a local handyman known for his skill with just about anything that needed fixing. He had gone into the woods to repair a broken fence bordering his property and never returned. His wife reported him missing, and the townsfolk gathered for a search party. They scoured the forest for hours, calling his name until their voices were hoarse, but all they found was his toolbox, scattered across the forest floor as if he had dropped it in a hurry. Days turned into weeks, and hope faded. Then came the whispers. People claimed to hear strange noises at night, distant cries that echoed through the trees. Others spoke of shadows that moved just beyond the edge of their vision, vanishing when they turned to look. Among those intrigued by the mystery was a young journalist named Emma Wells. She had grown up in Blackwood but moved to the city to pursue her career. When she heard about the disappearances and the unsettling rumors, she decided to return to her hometown. Emma was no stranger to covering dark stories, but this felt personal. She arrived in Blackwood on a chilly afternoon, the air thick with the scent of decaying leaves. Her childhood home was just as she remembered, cozy with a porch that creaked underfoot. Her mother welcomed her with open arms but couldn't hide the worry etched into her face. "It's good to see you, Emma," her mother said, pulling her into a hug, "but I wish it were under better circumstances." That evening, Emma sat at the kitchen table, a notebook in front of her. "Tell me everything," she urged. Her mother hesitated. "Daniel Harper wasn't the first, you know. There were stories even when I was young, people vanishing without a trace. But it was never like this. Now it feels different, darker." Emma's curiosity was piqued. She decided to investigate the forest herself, despite her mother's protests. The next morning, armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a voice recorder, Emma made her way to the edge of the woods. The towering trees cast long shadows across the ground, and the air was unnervingly still. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the narrow path. The deeper she went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. Emma's footsteps echoed eerily, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She paused to take a few photos, capturing the gnarled trees and the thick underbrush. As she lifted the camera to her eye, she caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a figure darting between the trees. Her heart raced. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. Silence. Emma pressed on, determined to find answers. She followed the direction where she'd seen the figure, pushing through thorny bushes that snagged at her clothes. Suddenly, she stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, weathered by time and covered in moss. Strange symbols were carved into its surface, symbols that Emma didn't recognize but that filled her with a sense of unease. Surrounding the altar were remnants of candles, their wax melted into the ground. Emma's voice recorder was still running. "This is Emma Wells," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I found something. I don't know what it is, but it feels wrong." She snapped several photos before noticing something else, footprints in the dirt leading away from the altar. They were large and deep, as if made by something heavy. Her instincts told her to turn back, but curiosity overrode caution. She followed the tracks deeper into the forest. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed even more twisted and foreboding. Then she heard it, a low, guttural growl that made her blood run cold. Emma froze, her breath hitching. The growl came again, closer this time. Panic set in and she fumbled for her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at her from the shadows. Emma's heart pounded as she took a step back, her mind racing. She had to get out of there. Now she turned and ran, branches whipping at her face and arms. The growl echoed behind her, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Emma didn't dare look back. The path blurred as fear fueled her escape. Her foot caught on a root, and she went sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle, but she forced herself up, adrenaline numbing the ache. The edge of the forest was in sight, just a few more steps. With a final burst of energy, Emma broke through the tree line and collapsed onto the grass. The growling ceased, and the oppressive weight lifted from her chest. Breathing heavily, she looked back at the forest. The shadows were still, but she knew better than to believe she was safe. That night, as she sat in her room reviewing the photos and audio, Emma's hands trembled. The voice recorder had captured more than her whispered observations. In the background, there was a faint chanting, voices speaking in a language she didn't understand. And then came the growl. Emma knew she couldn't keep this to herself. Blackwood needed to know the truth, even if it was a truth they wouldn't want to hear. The woods weren't just haunted by secrets. They were alive with something ancient and malevolent, and it was waiting.